Hello, hello. I would just like to show off my race and character selection setup using Lyra's cosmetic system. This will just be a sort of demo video. I will do a quick bird's eye view of the code, what particular classes are doing things, but the actual specifics I would save for blog posts, so I can actually post the full code along with them. And basically, I'm just going to end up rambling too much if I try to go through the full code. Uh, so the primary setup of the system is using a base race class. This would be equivalent to the B Manny or B Quinn in standard Lyra. I have just extended that with a few variables, some additional functionality for switching cosmetic components, or components within the cosmetic, I guess might be a better way to put it. So basically, it has the functionality where you can switch individual parts. So here's a category for antlers. I have the option of either these deer antlers or switching over to a shield. These visuals are very much a work in progress, so I don't have a whole lot of assets to work with. Uh, so it has any number of individual components that make it up. But you can also switch the actual race itself. This is not a great example because I just have the one skeletal mesh to work with, but you can switch here to boots, and this is, you see the boots appear. That is now the actual main skin mesh of the character. All of the stuff has disappeared because this is basically a blank one, just as an example, just to show off the switching. So this is switching the actual race if you're doing a game like Elder Scrolls or Warcraft or something like that. But that would also work for something more akin to Overwatch. Uh, instead of going through and having a full inventory system after you've made the character, you could basically fit all of the things that the Overwatch character has into just this race or character cosmetic, whatever you'd want to call it, and just deal with it through that. But I, of course, I want to. My initial plan with this was more of an Elder Scrolls kind of thing, so I have an actual inventory that goes afterwards and that kind of stuff. Uh, you see, there are skills like these would be more like active skills you'd put on the action bar, uh, but then you also have different attributes, different passive gameplay effects. Like if you look down here, you'll see the mana will tick down rapidly because I just put a mana drain effect on this boots race, and also the max speed is insanely fast on these boots. I can get going. The acceleration isn't ramped up too much though, so it still takes a while to get going, but it goes very fast. But then the elf instead has just boosted max health to show it off. So you have different attributes, different passives, different actives, different abilities, basically anything you would want for a RPG or MOBA or anything like that can work through this system. So the basic idea is it is working on this race base. And this is made basically just by duplicating either the B Manny or B Quinn, and then taking the skin and setting it so there's just no skeletal mesh on it, adding some different variables to it, and then in the begin play, I have a message listener that is listening for a body part swap message, and it will use that to actually switch those individual components. So something very nice about this setup is you can have any number of components to it. Right now, I am just working with one skeletal mesh and then any number of static meshes, but I'm going to extend it to deal with more things like, multiple skeletal meshes, anything else I can think of, more akin to if you've seen the demo for modular characters that Epic has released, where you can have a single character that has a lot of different things on it. So like here's an actual child of this race-based class, and it's the race elf. You see it has a different amount of static meshes associated with it, and that can be any number, and I will figure out how to do some skeletal meshes with that as well. But the actual child class here of that race base, so your actual specific race or character, has all these variables that it fills out, and these are very game specific. So it would really depend. I mean, I'll release the code and that kind of stuff, but it's you're going to kind of have to season it to taste whatever kind of game you're making. You'll have to change that. And also, you see, I have a lot of different meshes here. This isn't necessarily the best way to do it with all these individual components, but if you pop over to Blender, this is the character I'm working on, and you can see the triangles are extremely high. Well, actually, you might not be able to do YouTube's compression, but it's about 700,000 triangles. So I'm really interested in trying to create characters that are extremely high poly but still performant by utilizing nanite, and particularly the Valley of the Ancients demo that Epic has shown, where you can socket static meshes into parts of the character. They showed it with a robot, but I would like to experiment with getting that into more organic things. So anything that could potentially be rigid, like any part of the body that is not going to move, like antlers. These are insanely high poly, just as a test. And something like teeth. These can be, if I can select them here, incredibly high poly, and even this I can go further because like like the roof of the mouth, that realistically is not going to have to deform, so I would be able to fill this in, basically replace as much as I can in the body that would not move, switch that into static mesh, and basically just experiment to see if this is a reasonable idea for a way to do things. So it ends up being, a considerably different setup. But the actual main skeletal mesh itself is about, which would just be this skin here that is selected. That's about 52,000 polys, which is super reasonable. I think Manny is maybe like 80,000. Not exactly sure, but I think that's what I remember from it. So the idea here is offload everything into nanite whenever possible. So every character is a combination of skeletal mesh pieces that are very optimized for poly count, and then static mesh pieces which are very optimized for the number of materials they use, draw calls, that kind of stuff. That's the idea, at least. And I'm doing the exact same thing with my equipment setup. So like all of these individual pieces have, or like my equipment set up the same way, where I can have a variable number of static and skeletal meshes. Basically just really trying to lean heavily on nanite. So within this actual character, you have these individual parts that can be swapped. These would be a specific category. So it would be something like here, the antlers. I fill that out in the construction script for it. And this is not necessarily the way I'm going to do it. This is just kind of the initial prototype way. And it works where I have an array. Down here, the body part category is array, but it's array of structs of actual categories. So these specific parts are too many of these words are similar. But then that has an array of actual parts within it. And these are all soft object references to static meshes. So it will not be, overloading things that it doesn't need. Like this, I think I'm probably going to switch to a more data-oriented setup, but it does work right now. It's just like a little test. If you pick up this dragon skull, you just slay the dragon, you can now have an extra part, and you can get this Drake skull here that you can wear. Uh, this is not an actual item. This is not through the inventory system. This is specifically swapping the mesh that is in that part. The actual item version of it. It's different. Uh, so that's a little goofy right now because I was not considering unlocks whenever I initially designed this system. My entire goal was basically to replicate the Elder Scrolls style of character creation system, but lean on nanite as heavily as I could, and also utilize the cosmetic system that has been released with Lyra and try to get an understanding of that. Uh, so because of the way I'm doing this particular thing, I kind of just hacked my way with that pickup there. So it's on an instantiated version of the race. It's not actually affecting anything permanent that the character can handle or that can be referenced later. So like if I swap over to the boot setup and then swap back to elf, you see that option is gone. So I'm gonna have to switch things over to some kind of data table setup or something. I'll have to mull that over and try to consider it. Like this meets my initial requirements, but now that I've realized the unlocks are possible, I would like to try to extend the system to handle that if I reasonably can. Uh, so the actual race swap menu here is working primarily through two main widgets. There's some other individual pieces, but the main thing it does is when it constructs, when it's initially created, it will do this refresh function, which goes through, clears everything, finds whatever current race you are utilizing, and sets that as a variable. And then it goes through and starts setting everything according to that race. So it goes through this race choices, which currently is a map on the character. This is what actually determines what races you can be, or what characters, however you want to do it. I mean, these would be like Overwatch characters or something too. But this is a map between a name and one of the children of that race-based class, and these are soft class references, so they are not loaded all the time. So basically, it will take this that is saved on your main character, or on my main character at this point, which that might end up moving. It loops through all of that and adds an option for every one of those specific races or characters, and that would be this switcher right here. And then it goes through using that race. It gets every body part category and creates a widget of that and adds it to a scroll box. So you see that would be these here, like this antlers deer combination. That would be one of those widgets. And there are just two available for this, so that's what it does. And this is a dynamic thing, so if you have a character that doesn't have any options or has different options, you're not limited to have a specific amount. So once it has basically generated this widget, it will. The only other logic in here is handling whenever the actual race is changed. So when it does that, it finds the selection that you had just done, removes it's a soft reference, so it then instantiates that race reference or whatever you'd want to call it, character reference, destroys the old one, creates the new one, adds that to the cosmetics component, and then it sends out a message. And then it refreshes itself afterwards to get the new races stuff set up. So this message here is handled in the B race base. So when it's begun, it listens for these. Oh no, sorry, that's the different message. It is the character itself that is listening for that. So this is the typical begin play setup from Lyra. I then have a bunch of game specific stuff, like initializing different attributes and that kind of stuff. But it does this thing where it's listening for the message. So I currently have a switch here because I plan to switch my equipment system over to using this cosmetics component as well. Um, but right now it's just this one thing. The first time it will do this stuff anyway because this is basically your race initialization. So it will find the race that you currently are by just looping through all your character parts, finding the one that is a child of race base, basically that is a race base. Sets that, and then it does a bunch of stuff, and this stuff is all very game specific and very specific to how, like, what information you actually need on your characters or races. But the general idea with these is it's just a sequence where the first thing it does is remove everything from the old race, and then the second thing is add everything from the new race. Um, so like probably a best example that is not specific because I'm setting up everything through ARC inventory would be gameplay effects. Uh, so you have specific racial effects that are set up so they all have the tag gameplay effect.racial on them. It will remove all the ones that are currently on you. So that would be anything from your previous race. And then goes through this array that race base has of racial gameplay effects and then just adds all of those. So those are handling any kind of passives that you would have on the character, like a constant regen effect or their gameplay effects. You can do anything. But I also have an infinite duration one that I'm using for making attribute adjustments so that one character has more health than the other one, that kind of stuff. So those are all done there. So that all happens whenever you swap races by picking that drop down here. But it will also happen the first time because it actually needs to initialize. So the other part, the primary part of this, is these individual body part categories. That is this other widget that these get added by looping through all the parts. Whenever it's created, it does its refresh, which is just going through the specific body part category that is assigned to it. Whenever it is initially created here, so you grab the body part category from the thing you're looping through, assign it. It adds all the option names and does the current one, that kind of stuff. So it basically just fills itself out. And then whenever that is actually selected, it will package itself up and send that through a message to the B race base class that is listening for it. Because when this initializes, it will listen for these body part swap messages, and that will get the thing that is supposed to, like the specific part it is supposed to swap to, which would be like one of these parts here. Those are the static mesh components. And then also the new mesh, which is the thing you basically just picked. So this will see if it is the owner. Basically, that if it's the target body or race that it is. If it is, it will go through all of the components, grab that, and once that loads in, it will set it. So I think that is a good enough demo of the system. I will hopefully get the code and everything a little polished up here, and then I will start making some blog posts on it soon. I'm going to be making everything free and available. Because I really like open source stuff, but I'm also starting a Patreon. If anyone is interested in throwing some spare change in my tip jar, I would certainly appreciate it. And I'm also looking for work. So if you see the stuff I'm up to and think I would be a good fit for your studio, please let me know. All right, well, thank you, and I'd like to see your game soon.